and she has to leave at 4:30, so we have one hour to go. So let me introduce first our guests and then raise a general question, and then we would go more into details. First panel was more about the analysis and and trying to reveal what are the natures of this relationship between European Union and the Western Balkans, Central Eastern Europe and the Western Balkans. Right now we would more focus on policies. And we have three very good speakers who are well embedded in the policy community and have diplomatic experience as well, so I'm sure that we can dig deep into the topics. On my right, it's Corina Stratulak, who is the senior analyst of the European Policy Center. Also, she's running the European Institutions programs and running the programs on the Western Balkans. Corina is originally from Romania, a country that is a big bridge between the countries that want to join the European Union and the European Union itself. Then to the right, it's József Pandu, my ex-colleague at Political Capital. He was director of Political Capital long time ago, and also he is a very well-known and experienced diplomat who was ambassador to Sarajevo and to Belgrade as well of Hungary beforehand. And then to and he had a lot of other positions, but we don't have time to go deep into them. They can come up during the discussion. And to my extreme right, it's Ivan Vejvoda, the permanent fellow at the Institute of Human Sciences. Also, Ivan was an advisor of several presidents in Serbia regarding EU affairs. Also, he was running big projects and the German Marshall Fund as well in their activities in reaching out to the broader region. So we have speakers who have experience from Brussels, from Hungary, from Serbia, and from EU, and also from Washington about the relationship of the West towards the Western Balkans. My first question would be to set the stage. What do you think could be the realistic timeline for accession for the countries in the Western Balkans who want to join? Not just North Macedonia and Albania. Chancellor Merkel recently told on a meeting that she hopes that in March the negotiations could be relaunched, and countries that raised objections beforehand, France, Netherlands and Denmark, will ease their objections. But also we are talking about Bosnia, here we are talking about Montenegro, here we are talking about Serbia here. Beforehand, Juncker made a very optimistic statement about naming, I think, 2025 as a possible date for the next enlargement round. My short question would be, what do you think is the realistic time frame, if any, for further integration? First point on this.
Right, thank you for the kind invitation and the opportunity to contribute to this discussion. I think the discussion about the timeline is really missing the point at the moment. I don't think we are. I don't think it's necessarily the most constructive and the best way to approach the situation as it is at present. And the situation at present is one in which the two sides, and that's the EU and the member states on the one hand, and the Balkan region on the other, are individually and together very confused. And so until we sort out internally the mess, but also the interaction, and understand what we really want from each other, we can't really realistically speak of a timeline, if you were to ask me. On the side of the European Union, we know already that the member states have lost their appetite for expansion, and anxieties related, for example, to economic and political pressures inside the EU, but also to daunting challenges in the Balkan region and individual countries in the region, have actually over time prompted EU capitals to become increasingly more assertive, but also more hands-on with the enlargement dossier. And this so-called creeping nationalization, as Helion coined it, of the process has manifested itself for quite some time now through, for instance, through an increase in the national safeguards and mechanisms to steer and conduct enlargement, through an increased intergovernmentalization of the process, in that the General Affairs Council and the European Council now play a more decisive role in decisions on enlargement, but also, and here often overruling or actually ignoring the opinion of the European Commission is worth saying, and also basically through a growing influence of domestic politics at key moments of the enlargement process and over decisions on the dossier. And to be sure, I mean, to a certain extent, there's nothing wrong with being strict and with wanting actually to do better this time around in order to ensure that the acceding countries are ready and they can sustain the reforms that have been undertaken in order to avoid a repetition of the situation in the latest rounds of waves of enlargement, including Romania and Bulgaria. The problem with however, with such a carefully managed process by the member states, is, however, that it can fall hostage to specific disputes, like we've seen, and we've seen in the past with Greece and now North Macedonia, but we're still seeing it with Serbia and Kosovo, and also to considerations that have more to do with the vagaries of national politics in the member states rather than with the situation on the ground in the Balkans. And of course, this can pay electoral benefits for the countries who play such games, but ultimately such strategies allow the EU to drag the process and to create the impression that the member states' commitment to the dossier is no longer there. And this is dangerous because the EU's power of attraction and leverage actually rests on its credibility. And so if the EU no longer appears to be serious about this commitment and delivering on its Thessaloniki promise, then of course the region's focus on the integration agenda is also likely to dissipate, straining the relationship between the two sides. And this is actually what we're kind of already seeing happening. Now, of course, I don't want to deny or undervalue the fact that there are also voices that support enlargement among the member states, and also I don't want to downplay the support, the substantial engagement of the European Commission with the Balkan countries. I think this sort of rhetorical backing from the highest political level in some of the member states and the continuous engagement of the Commission matter on the dossier, but they of course cannot substitute for enlargement and for those countries taking steps forward on their EU track. And oftentimes here the member states justify their hesitation or even hostility towards enlargement to the Balkans on grounds that they wouldn't want to see the EU importing the region's problems. But these arguments, I think, fails to recognize that the borderline between what's European and what is Balkan is increasingly quite gray, quite uneven, and this not least to an already very high level of integration between the two sides. The Union, as we know, is already the Balkans' key trading partner, and of course the Union is also its main socio-economic model of development. And so this means that the Balkan countries take the brunt of decisions and developments that happen in the EU, while also being natural allies for the EU at a time when other allies like the UK and the EU seem to be in retreat. So, and the fact that there is this interdependence has been heavily underscored lately during the refugee/migration crisis, the financial economic crisis, and of course it goes even beyond that because the EU and the Balkans share also the same interest and problems when it comes, for example, to geopolitical instability in the neighborhood, the unpredictability of global players, for instance, Russia, terrorism, radicalization, organized crime, cyber attacks, illiberal tendencies, demographic decline, climate change, all of this, and the region's unsolved war legacies, all of this keep the two sides basically on their toes and in the same boat. And I think we can, the EU at least, have kind of lost sight of that, or doesn't always seem to be aware of this interdependence. And therefore, the calls that we've had recently of consolidation before enlargement, I think propose a false sequencing, because solving the Balkan problems means solving Europe's problems, and solving Europe's problems means solving Balkan's problem. And so the interaction between the two is very important, yet is not recognized as such. And until we understand that there's a strong interdependence already, and until we recognize that this project of enlargement is a logic, strategical choice, and not a conditional process as it has come to be, I think it's almost futile to talk about accession dates. I'm sorry, I made a short story long.
No problem, you killed my question, but still, as I decided to go on with this one, so I will read the same question to József and Ivan as well. So, József, what do you think about the integration timeline or its possibilities?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Second, I'm really jealous of Mr. Krastev for his joke about the Turkish and Albanian presidents. It's really a very good one and right. I think nobody knows, nobody knows in Brussels, nobody knows in the member states and in the candidate states. What I see as a problem is that the politicians of the Western Balkans, and I know this because I talk to them very frequently, they are very disappointed in the EU and the EU enlargement policy. Thank God that the societies of the Western Balkans countries still supporting the idea of membership, to become a member of the European Union. And this is the only thing why the politicians of the Western Balkan countries still talking the right thing about the EU enlargement, EU to join the European Union. From the perspective of the European Union, I think more realistic to keep the enlargement policy alive than to talk about the dates becoming the members of the country, member of the candidate countries. Thank you.
So let me raise a bit malicious question. So politicians in the Western Balkans are disappointed because they don't see enough willingness, or they are even afraid of the impact of the integration because it's not always in the best interest of the political elite.
No, because they don't see the real perspective of the EU enlargement. This is the problem. It started already in 2009. In 2009, first time, some of the Brussels politicians said that now we will stop the enlargement process. We don't know for how long time. And since then, after every European elections, we got the same message from Brussels, from member states, especially last time from Mr. Macron. So I see this is as a problem. And this is why the politicians of the Western Balkan countries are highly disappointed in the European Union.
Ivan, do you experience the same kind of disappointment, talking a lot to diplomats and politicians in the Western Balkans, and particularly Serbia?
Well, thank you very much, Peter, and it's a real honor to be on the panel with Ambassador Panter, whom I met in Belgrade when he was ambassador, and with Corina, who's one of the experts on our region. To tell you honestly, I'm disappointed with ourselves, with our countries who are not doing the hard work of democratic reform. You know, I learned very early on in the 90s when we were fighting Milosevic and trying to make Serbia democratic, which took us about 10 years until we beat him at the elections, that a reflex that some people have in some of our countries, much less, they say Europe must do this, the US must do that. And you know, one famously European official said, we don't have to do anything, you have to do it, a bit brutally, right? What I mean by that is that 95% is the work that we have to do, homework at home, how to make our societies, polities, states, democratic states based on the rule of law. And of course, the cherry on the top is everything that the EU does. So keeping us on track, sending funds, IPA funds, other things, being visited, integrating us into parts of the EU mechanisms where one can, and maybe we can talk about that a little more later, about concrete things, how and what can be done before membership is a reality. But let me, if you allow me, Peter, just a few sort of more general words. What we're caught in between is what has already been said already in the first panel. Nobody has reneged on the policy of enlargement of the European Union. There's no official document that says it. The converse side of that is that we get caught in the headwinds of domestic politics of the member states. And Corinna and her team did a wonderful report on attitudes of every single of the 28 member states then towards enlargement. And it is in between these two things that we are operating. And it is very important, however formal that statement from von der Leyen now, from Borrell, you know, that the Western Balkans integration is a must and that Europe is not complete until that happens. Peter Balash, in his introduction, mentioned, you know, this famous word, neologism, unfinished business. It always reminds me, I was invited to do my first hearing in the US Foreign Affairs Committee Senate in 2004, July, when Biden was presiding the Foreign Affairs Committee, and the other senator who was there was Vojnovic, who unfortunately passed away. The title of that hearing 15 years ago was Unfinished Business in the Balkans. So, you know, we've been in unfinished business for a very long time. And I remember saying, writing, presenting my views, that the unsung story then in 2004, this was 4 years after we got rid of Milosevic, was that regional cooperation was not talked about. There was already a lot of cooperation, you know, not only cultural, not only educational, not only sports, not only families sort of being reunited, not only the fact that in most of this region we speak a common language. There was already sort of a revivification. That was the time that Josip was ambassador then, and he witnessed that. The problem being, of course, as Ivan Krastev rightly said, we got caught in the global economic crisis because growth in the region was roughly 6% before the crisis, sort of average 6, 7, depending on the country. And when you have economic, you know, winds, tailwinds, it's fine because you can do some hard things. As soon as that stopped, then you had this decline, and then you got caught in the fact that the European Union was confronting huge challenges of its own. And that, of course, then opened spaces, as the euphemism said, for third countries, Russia, China, Turkey, the Emirates, etc. Because, you know, politicians need to find money to keep themselves going. Investments have continued. I mean, in Serbia in particular, we are the only country in this tiny region that has a car factory, the Fiat car factory, that came, you know, that has a tradition from far away. German, South Korean, other investments continue as we speak. Of course, the Chinese are investing in various infrastructure projects. That is because we are not getting, you know, infrastructure money from the European Union. And by that I mean that there's a lack of a kind of forward-looking geopolitical investment. And that brings me to this geopolitical commission of Ursula von der Leyen. I mean, if there's anything geopolitical, and I think it's been said before already here in this room, then it is integrating this last part of Europe. And if that is not, if Europe, the European Union is not capable of doing that, what the hell are we trying to do in China, in the Middle East, in, you know, God knows what other places. So I would say that, and as I said, formally it's repeated that this is a priority. Borrell was in Belgrade and Pristina just 2 days ago. He said this is a priority for us. Now we'll see, you know, there's talk about the appointment of a special envoy. You know, there's talk of some people who do know the region. The Americans, as you know, have 2 special envoys. There's Matt Palmer for the Southeastern Europe, and then there's the American ambassador in Berlin, Mr. Grinnell, who's specifically appointed for Serbia-Kosovo, who just managed to open an airline flight between Pristina and Belgrade. So, as usual, the Americans, you know, are spearheading a lot of this. Europe is slow, but it gets its work done. Finally, to your point about the date, and I'm sorry for belaboring this, I think it was very important that the European Commission came out with a document exactly a year ago, presenting a new framework, which was both very critical of the region, you know, what you haven't done and what you need to do, but then giving famously this date of 2025. I found that extremely important because it's like when you know, inscribe in the CEU in the first year, you know that if you do all your exams in 3 or 4 years, you will get your diploma. You know what the homework is. If you don't, you won't get it. And I think this is the sort of incentive, and it works psychologically the same way. If we do our homework, and I'm saying that not only theoretically, but practically, if there's a political will, to speak simply, do the acquis, get the rule of law, that these countries can, including the others, even though Serbia and Montenegro are the only ones who are candidates, but hopefully North Macedonia and Albania get it, it is possible. But if we move at the snail's pace of reform, as Angela Merkel has said in the region, then who knows when that date is? I, like Corinna, am very wary of talking about dates because when I was advisor to Prime Minister Djindjic in 2003, I was asked, you know, when do you expect to join? I said 2007. So, you know, so much for predictions and for hopes. But on a very personal note, not only am I a passionate European, I want to be a member of the European Union. You know, politicians talk about we do this for our children. No, I'm doing it for myself because I want to do that. And just, you know, with Ivan Krastev, with whom I've been friends for 30 years, just the difference in the way that he deals with bureaucracy in Vienna as a member, a citizen member of the European Union is completely different than I from Serbia, who are a non-member. So there are very tangible things about crossing borders, about bureaucratic, about being able to live in any part of Europe. And I think that is what is the reason why people in this region support the European Union. This is fundamental. If there was a referendum on Sunday in all of our 6 countries, you would have very clear majorities of people who want to be members. Just the same reason why the EU has in public opinion support in your country, in this country, whatever it is, 70%. In Poland, it's gone, I don't know, through the sky, you know, 80%, because people understand this is where there's a bulwark against the possible total craziness of our leaders. And so people want sort of the European Union, with all of its challenges, that is still in some way functioning as a cushion that maintains normality or boring life.
Yeah, the problem is that we do not find the same kind of high level of support towards the integration of the Western Balkans in every Western European countries, and this is one of the reasons, I would not say the only one, why some member states are more reluctant in their support. And ironically, some critics of the, let's say, of the quick continuation of the accession talks point to Central Eastern European countries, saying that, look, that they joined and then a lot of problem came. For example, in Hungary. So it's better to be a bit slower if we want these countries to get better prepared. I don't really share this argument, but this is pretty widespread. Would any of you dare to predict what is going to happen in the next European European Council meeting, where it will be on the table in March. So will France, Denmark, Netherlands soften up their position or not? So will the negotiations continue in March or not? Corina?
I just wanted to add one thing to what has been said. I mean, I agree in principle with the comments, but there is one other issue to consider, that it is very difficult to assess the extent to which these countries deliver on the homework, because the homework itself is increasingly detailed and has entered into territories that are very sensitive and are very difficult to consolidate. I mean, we're talking about creating functioning economies and consolidated democracies, and dealing with regional reconciliation and regional cooperation. All of these issues is difficult to not only to set a time frame on them. Some countries might take longer than others, but also to evaluate whether enough progress has been made, so that whatever progress has been made is sustainable. And all the more so when there is actually no ready-made solution or recipe for how to address these issues. I mean, the Commission has really worked quite hard in time to learn the different lessons that it had to absorb in order to improve the conditionality and the method towards those countries. But I mean, it's more than just using the right terms, and it's more than just acknowledging the problems, and it's more than just prescribing a number of benchmarks here and there. How do you deal with state capture by 2025? How do you bring this?
Hungary will show the way.
Yes, it's easy to say that these countries should just do the homework and then their way in is ensured. Who is to say when they would have done their homework? You know, that's the problem. And then there is also another issue which I wanted to raise, linked to the previous panel. I think this idea that these countries wanted to be normal, and normality meant to be like the West. I dare to say that these countries have achieved that to a certain extent. They are like the West, but not necessarily. They have converged, but actually not in the positive things necessarily. So, I mean, because again, the economic problems, the democratic problems, the problems with brain drain, the migration, refugee, the geostrategic challenges, all of those, I mean, we've come to be in the same boat, and it's not by coincidence that we're there. I mean, the strategy in a certain sense has been successful, but it hasn't delivered or hasn't brought us where we wanted to be. And that's something to think about. As regards the next council, I mean, I would think that, I mean, I've only seen the Commission's new proposal just now. After a first glance at it, I have the feeling that the Commission has tried its best to appease France, at least at the level of rhetoric. So I would expect that there would be a change in the decision. I'm not sure that it would be for both countries. Probably most likely for North Macedonia, but I'm not sure about whether the attitude will change with respect to Albania.
Okay. I can't resist the temptation to do a bit of role play, or you will do the role play. I will be just the moderator. Yeah. So let's start right now with Ivan. So Ivan, you were consulting Serbian presidents, prime ministers on related issues. If Alexander Vučić would come to you now and would ask that what would be the 2 to 3 things that Serbia has to do if they really would like to join the European Union, what would be the things that you would raise? Do the homework, but if you can mention a few specific steps that could be done, and not just on the side of the Serbia, but other countries in the Western Balkans.
Well, basically, I'd like to second what Corina said. You know, there are these requirements, but you know, from a from a political point of view, no one in the European Union expects you to present an angelic situation. I mean, remember the media situation in Italy under Berlusconi. I mean, not to mention other examples. So, you know, nobody's perfect. But I think what the European Union and what, again, I as a citizen of my country expect to see a genuine effort at creating the conditions of a democratic society. And that's very minimal in a sense. I need to see that we're really working and moving towards the independence of the judiciary. Number one, and that would be an advice if I were asked to give it. You know, do a little something. You know, just move it, and that is immediately visible then. Secondly, you know, open the media space, or rather loosen a little bit the control over some of the state-run media, which is not state-run; it's a public service, as you know. In Serbia, we have this situation with the cable news network N1, which is an affiliate of CNN that is, you know, being blocked in certain circumstances. There's a huge debate. The Prime Minister has weighed in on this, you know, but there's, I don't know the intricacies of it, but clearly, because N1 is, let's say, an objective media outlet, which says the good things and the bad things, which I think is the way for society to be well informed and take informed decisions. Why not open it up? You know, you go to Italy, even under when Salvini was in government, you know, you have this channel where politicians are all day on TV criticizing that. It hasn't lowered Mr. Salvini's, in fact, his ratings are going up. So I think those would be the two areas where I would really urge that there is a beginning of movement. I would also like to repeat what Ivan Krastev said. You know, these different, we talk about Hungary, Serbia, or Orban, Vucic. Ivan was completely right. There was a completely different attitude to the migration crisis. Vucic in Serbia said, no, we're not going to build walls. We're going to treat these people. Serbia had 250,000 Serbs expelled from Croatia in August 5th, 1995. We were there. NGOs helped, people helped. 250,000 people in the span of 6-7 days. That is, you know, not that we're used to this, but there's an experience that you need to help people in need. Secondly, what Ivan didn't need to say, President Vucic meets with George Soros and Alex Soros, and this is public news. This is not secret. So a complete opposite of what we're seeing here. There's no, I mean, some tabloids every now and then use, you know, put a sentence here or there, but, you know, there's an understanding that because the Soros Foundation has foundations in all of our 6 countries, and that they've been present since 1990, they are a kind of support in creating networks and, you know, connecting people and connecting various projects. This idea and this project of what's, you know, cliche called mini Schengen or common market for the Western Balkans comes, among other, from ideas that sprang from those. So President Vucic, President Rama of Albania, and the Prime Minister Zaev, who's no longer Prime Minister, came up with this idea. There's a talk that Montenegro will join it, and it is open, clearly stated, to Kosovo and to Albania as well. There's been a realization, and this is in a sense part of this discussion, that as we wait for the European Union to do more, we need to do much more ourselves. And I think this is a very positive example of the regional cooperation. You need to demonstrate, you know, apropos of overcoming the past, confronting the terrible things that were done in our name in the 90s. Leaders need to take leadership. And I think that's one of the dimensions of the discussion that we're having. We need leadership in our countries on these things, but we need leadership in the European Union member states to explain to their people there's nothing wrong with these countries coming in. In fact, if we're serious about Europe itself, this must be, however long it takes. You know, you had this crazy situation in the French parliamentary elections where 12 candidates for the European Parliament were asked, you know, do you want Serbia to join? 10 of these candidates said, no, we don't want Serbia to join. This is pure domestic populist politics. It has nothing to do with enlargement.
Josef,
Yeah,
if Viktor Orban would come to you and ask
no. I would rather give some advices to President Vučić.
Okay, so then an imaginary Prime Minister of Hungary would ask you, as it, I assume, happened in the past, that what should be done in the Western Balkans, what would be your main points?
Okay, so let's step back a little bit. We were talking about this homework, what the countries, candidate countries have to do, and it must be done by the state institutions, led by the top politicians of these countries. And we know from our experiences that state institutions led by the politicians will do the minimum what leads these countries to start the negotiations and to finish negotiations on 20 and something chapters, but necessary to become a member state of the European Union. I have no doubt that most of the politicians of Serbia, Bosnia, and the other countries of the Western Balkans are ready to do that, this minimum. What Ivan said about the support of the society of the EU integration, yes, it's really high, but I think it's rather because the people looking at the living standard of the EU member states, and they would like to go reach these living standards, and not because, with all due respect, they are so wise that they would like to somehow withdraw the how to say to stop these politicians, for example, Vučić, to how did you say to
no, I would, if I may, I think it's kind of common. People have common sense. 90% of people have common sense. If you're living in a building that has 20 stories, and you know, whatever, 14 are part of some communal effort in the building, the 6 say, well, why are we not part of this? I mean, why are we acting as something strange? I think that it's very basic. Why are we not? And in terms of the former Yugoslav states, everyone has someone in Europe since the 1960s and 70s, since the Gastarbeiter movement, in Austria, in Sweden, in France, in Denmark, in Germany, and so everyone knows what's happening in the European Union. So I think you want to be part of a club where everyone else is, and you're on this small island. So and that translates into, why don't we have a normal life? Well, yeah, there's a bit of corruption, there's a bit of that, but at least I know there's a little more certainty, a little more prosperity. Yes, you're right, people want to live better. And then a little more outlook. I don't need to worry that tomorrow will be different than it is today.
Yes, I totally agree. But we cannot forget that there are some, besides this homework, there are some other obstacles between some of the Western Balkan countries, for example, Serbia. This is the problem of the question of Kosovo.
Absolutely.
Not mentioning Bosnia and Herzegovina. For Bosnia and Herzegovina would be the hardest to do this, to finish this homework, because in Bosnia and Herzegovina we have a very complicated state with 2 entities, and within one entity is 10 cantons. It's the most complicated states of the world right now. I can show you, yeah. We are expecting from the politicians of Bosnia and Herzegovina to make a normal, democratic, functioning country from something what was created by the international community in Dayton. And this is the hardest job for the Western Balkans politicians right now. And this is that kind of obstacle for problem for Bosnia and Herzegovina, I hardly can imagine they can solve this problem.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. No, just, yes, absolutely. I mean, there's so much to say, but the Serbia-Kosovo issue is definitely one of the major unresolved issues. And to his credit, President Vučić has given a lot of effort to that. I mean, the signing of the Brussels Agreement in 2013 was a huge step at that moment. Obviously, domestic politics get into it, by which I mean the fact that Kosovo had elections. We have a prime minister, Albin Kurti, as of yesterday, and so hopefully we'll see some slow movement. But classically, you need two to tango. So the talks absolutely could not move in this time when Kosovo put tariffs on Bosnia and Serbia, and so now we'll hopefully see that. But and I go back to Prime Minister Đinđić. I mean, then in 2003 he was saying we need to solve this issue as soon as we can because this is a ball and chain around our neck. The other issue that was big then was the Hague Tribunal, and he would come into the office every day and say we need to solve these two things. Here we are 16 years or 17 years later and we haven't solved it, and President Vučić has been saying we need to do this, but there's so much that needs to be done. But I'd like to second what Josef said. Bosnia is definitely the most complicated one of all, and I think will be solved in Kosovo before we see a full movement of Bosnia and Herzegovina forward, which, as the cliche says, is the mini Yugoslavia.
Corina, what do you think about the possibilities from the EU side? And I would like to even ask if there are no agreement on the continuation of the accession talks. What can the EU do? What would you recommend to Ursula delay and to do if there is no agreement between the member states?
Right. Maybe I can also respond to the previous question and then answer the one you mentioned, because I think there's a couple of other elements to add. I think theoretically it would be very important for the Balkan countries and leaders to offer political alternatives, political choice, which means the ability of their electorates to choose among viable alternatives and actually vote people out of office and vote new people into office on the basis of a different program. And that's not really happening at the moment. So creating political pluralism in those countries, if you want. And that's something that theoretically is in their power to achieve. I mean, the leaders and the political elites in those countries, but also the people. And then the other thing is offer people policy choice, which is something that Ivan Krastev has often emphasized. The enlargement process remains, he still has a strong executive bias. There is very little parliamentary debate around what is actually being implemented and how and when. And of course, people may change governments, but they can hardly change their policies, given that a lot of what has to be done, whatever is on the policy agenda, is dictated by Brussels or IMF or World Bank or other commitments that those countries have. And so the scope for maneuver here is much more limited, but it's something which would definitely change a lot in those countries. And to be sure, it's actually a problem that is very similar to what we have in the member states as well, and it's perhaps a very concrete area in which the two sides can engage to come with creative ideas. This is happening because of the EU, but it's also happening because of a lack of imagination of how else we could adapt our democracies to the 21st centuries in order for them to still create the possibility for change when we don't like things. That is starting to lack in our political system, and it's a problem that is quite generalized. And finally, I think very concretely, many of the Balkan governments in the situation in which we are well advised to reach out to member states and strengthen diplomatic relations and strengthen friendships, but also make new friendships if you want. Understand, map a little bit the the variety of interests among the member states and attitudes towards their own country, and then seek out to build alliances, strengthen friendships, and make new friends. With regards to the EU, I think, given that enlargement is where it is, we're still scratching our head about how we make this policy transformative, and I don't think we have the answer still. And while the process is still struggling because of all of these reasons. By the way, I don't think the public sees the problem. There are countries where the public is quite skeptical, yet the governments are quite supportive. So you have very interesting dynamics with regards to public government's attitudes and positions on enlargement. So in this situation in which enlargement is as it is, I think the one immediate thing the EU can do is try to strengthen the relationship around other policy areas which are of common interest. Now there is, the first step would be the Conference on the Future of Europe, where the Balkan countries should definitely be invited to participate and encouraged to start thinking and contributing, thinking about their positions on the different issues discussed, and develop their stances, even regional common stances if possible, and understand the policies that the EU is shaping and which they will have to subscribe to or be part of in the future if they become member states. But more generally, all of the issues that are now high on the policy agenda of the EU, be it with regards to climate and environment, or to digitalization, or to democracy, demography. All of those are issues of concern to the Balkans as well, and the discussions that are being currently carried out or will be carried out in this context should involve the Balkan countries as well as another means of engaging them, not as a substitute to enlargement, but as something to preoccupy concretely those countries in order to send the signal that they are our partners, and to also, as I said, stimulate them to think about their future, right? If the European perspective is really real and it is their future to be.
Thank you. So conscious of time, we have only 10 minutes left, then Corina has to leave. So I would open up the floor for, we can raise about 3 questions. Okay, first, István.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 short questions.
Please introduce yourself for the ones who don't know.
I'm István Szentiványi, former ex. My first question is, United Kingdom has been always one of the major driving forces behind enlargement. And now they left. What do you think? What will be the effect on the enlargement process after the leave of Britain? My second question is, the Commission published today a new enlargement strategy. This strategy reflects very much the French position, introducing a new strict monitoring process and to make reversible the whole enlargement process, to make it as it's not a one-way street, but a two-way street. Must be. How do you comment on it? It's a good step forward, it's good progress, or do you think it's not good progress? What do you think of it? And will be viable and feasible in the future?
More questions? Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Valentin Berca from Romania. Both panels, nobody talk about the military aspect regarding Western Balkans, and I think we must appreciate that at this moment Montenegro and Albania are NATO members. Maybe in April Albania will become NATO members. And my question is, what do you think European Union is looking for NATO to pave the ways of integration of Western Balkans countries? Because at this moment Serbia declared that intend to remain neutral state with many Russian defense equipment acquisition from also from Belarus. Also, you know, China sold several drones to Serbia. Also, Macron signed several contracts with Serbia regarding also defense equipment, usually and weapons. So I think the most important aspect is military aspect of Western Balkans. Everybody of us are looking for Eastern flank, but NATO is looking for
Southern flank.
Piraeus, Belgrade, Budapest corridor. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. More questions? Okay. Yes, please.
My name is Alexander Marszewski. I'm from University of Zagreb. One of the experiences that Croatia had as the main negotiator during the accession process was the Prime Minister Ivo Sanader, who is now behind bars. And I think the reality is that in the negotiation process, especially with Serbia and Montenegro, is that the current negotiators will probably be behind bars at the time when these countries join the European Union, as these corruption affairs are kind of piling up above these governments. So does the EU has some way to I know when it came to Croatia, there was a green light for this reaction to start these criminal proceedings against Ivo Sanader when it was time to join the European Union, because these countries cannot satisfy chapters 23 and 24, reform of the judiciary and all that, if they cannot tackle high-profile political corruption. So, is there any plan in the EU how to address these issues when it comes to Serbia and Montenegro? I see with Macedonia, I think that it was a very successful process to support this technical government and open up itself to negotiate both with the ruling and opposition parties to have this transition. Unfortunately, this didn't work out well with in the end with the accession, but with the opening the accession negotiations. But
sorry, I have to
yes.
interrupt
So,
you because.
so what is your opinion on that?
Okay. So Corina,
Okay.
you're the first, and probably Corina has to leave during the others to respond. So.
Yes. Right. Very quickly, because I do have to get downstairs. I don't really think the departure of the UK will change much. The UK was already on the skeptical side on many issues, and it's likely that it would have become even more skeptical if it stayed. Also, as I explained at the beginning, the nationalization trend is ongoing, has been ongoing, and it's not going to be reversed just because the EU departs. Also, we should remember that British interest in the region was more focused, if we can say so, particularly on Bosnia, Herzegovina, and Serbia, Kosovo, and so I'm not really sure that that Brexit really will change much. Second, with regard to the reversibility of the process, I'm a little bit surprised because, to my understanding, the process was already reversible before. I mean, the conditionality has not only been enhanced over the years, but the methodology for applying those conditions had already changed. All sorts of benchmarks for opening, intermediate, balance, closing chapters, where there suspension, more routine procedures for suspending negotiations, where there all sorts of conditions were introduced, for example, in the accession frameworks of Montenegro and Serbia with regard to chapters 21 and 23, that if not enough progress would be made on those, all the negotiations would be suspended. And also Serbia's accession had been conditional on progress, or progress in the negotiations had been made conditional on progress with regards to the normalization of relations with Kosovo. So the possibilities for suspending or reversing the process were already present as such. So now the Commission has reiterated, has made it perhaps more clear, but I'm still not convinced that actually we will use these kind of procedures. Now, yeah, with regards to corrupt leaders, of course the EU could do something. Many of those countries actually expect the EU to take more of a stance with regards to such instances and be more specific when it mentions state capture in the region. And I think so far it has been caught in a dilemma between supporting or tolerating self-declared pro-European leaders because they were delivering on certain areas, while also being frustrated with them because of what they were becoming. And I think that game where certain compromises were being made for the sake of progress with regards to certain conditions has probably finished, and we could expect the EU possibly to get more, to get stronger with respect to some of the authoritarian tendencies and leaders in the region. Well, I would hope so, but certainly it can do so if it wants to, I think. And certainly stop the duplicitary discourse where when it gets to the region, sometimes it comes across to the publics and in the media as being quite pleased with how things are handled by the political leadership in that country, while in reality writing state capture in the reports for those specific applicants. So, yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to rush through your questions.
Yes, I will reflect to the question about the NATO. Yes, it seems to me that the NATO somehow took the role of the European Union in the last couple of years, especially after Montenegro and Albania becoming member states of the NATO. It was stabilizing moments for the Western Balkan countries, and hopefully it will continue with Northern Macedonia and Bosnia and Herzegovina, and maybe even with Serbia. Bosnia and Herzegovina got the map. They are, of course, have some internal problems with the NATO membership, but anyway, the process to become a NATO member, it's a positive process. Concerning questions about the corrupt leader, I'm a little bit skeptical. I remember after happenings in Croatia, after arresting, after when Sanader was arrested, in the next couple of years in the international talks, negotiations about the Western Balkans, always was raised this as a positive example, and everybody was expecting something like will happen maybe in Montenegro or some other countries. But I have to say that I'm really skeptical, especially concerning Montenegro, that anything can like this can happen with, for example, Milošević.
I'll start with the NATO question. Actually, I had it on my list here. I think it's many of us still continue talking about Euro-Atlantic integration, and NATO is a key part of that. And the whole region, except Serbia, as you said, is on a path towards NATO. Bosnia, of course, we know the dilemmas, but as you rightly said, they are on a map now. With regards to the military cooperation, Serbia has 10 times more activities with NATO for every one military activity with Russia. But the Russian activity gets all the press, and the 10 NATO activities don't get the press. Serbia has the highest level of relationship it can before membership accession with NATO, the IPAP, Individual Partnership Action Plan, which is very important. Secondly, on the arms buying, you're right to raise that issue, but it's also very interesting that when Serbia had these Russian rockets there, we had the US envoy on arms who came to Serbia, and basically President Vučić had to give a very public statement that we're going to stop buying military weapons for the time being. So, you know, the balance, if we call it that, is still there, but a lot of this is due to, you know, populist politics. You know, you want to show your country that you're strong and that you have a military. Frankly, as a citizen, I don't know what we're going to use this for, because, you know, who are we going to fight? We did wars in the 90s. Nobody wants to go to war. Not any politician, even Dodik, who sort of flirts with secession, etc. You know, he comes to a limit and then walks back. It's dangerous to talk about secession. It's dangerous to talk about possible conflict. But if I'm not totally naive, there won't be a war anymore, because we suffered enormously, all of us, in the 90s and what happened. So I think that's something to reckon with, and that's again where leadership is so important. On the question of UK, Simon, thank you very much for that question. Paradoxically, the UK will continue to urge this region to join the European Union. You know, there was a funny thing on Twitter from Serbia with the UK flag said, Serbia welcomes the United Kingdom to the non-EU countries. But the Brits are very active. They're putting in development aid. They, you know, reopened BBC in Serbia and things like that. So they will continue to do their work. But you're right, they were one of the important, and they'll continue to be supporting enlargement. On the whole issue of this new paper, which Valerie leaked to us yesterday in the Financial Times, and it was leaked to you, but you talked about it. I'm very much in agreement with Corinna said. If we're sanguine, really nothing changes. And the best example of that is Turkey. Turkey has been a candidate forever, and they have been stopped, and they have been stopped. So, you know, whether you use the word reversibility or something, it's the same thing. And so I think it's, you know, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. You know, the more it changes, the more it remains the same thing. I must say, as somebody who studied in France and who's a Francophile, I was distressed by what Macron and France did on North Macedonia and Albania. I was shocked, totally shocked and distressed, because this whole fallacious argument between deepening and widening, frankly, is ridiculous, to be a bit impolite, because the nearest time, even if we take the 2025 date for the earliest accession, that means we're 5 years away. You can deepen as much as you want over 5 years before the first country approaches, and probably 2025 is not realistic. We're more probably looking towards 2030 if things go well. So France really put a spanner in the wheels here. A lot of credibility was lost, but I think, again, both the people and the leaders in the region are a bit used now to the kind of ups and downs of domestic politics in some of these countries. And I frankly believe, and sort of speaking to my friends in Paris, France will never recognize it, but they have internally recognized that they made a mistake. So this whole idea of remodeling the enlargement process was a kind of an attempt to show that they were interested, and I think we will be back on track. And to answer your question, Peter, I think that definitely North Macedonia gets it. I hope that Albania gets it. Netherlands seems to be, you know, thinking about that, but Netherlands has always followed. It has never stood out as the only country. You know, they've been very problematic on Serbia, I remember, for stabilization and association. So, you know, if things, because it's a no-cost thing to give a date to Albania, because you can stop it like Turkey for 30 years. So I think, you know, if I put my neck out on the limb, I think it will happen definitely. And finally, on our Croatian colleague's question, I'm a bit sort of in between. We're too early in the accession process to talk about that. So we'll see when the time comes, you know, when we're close to the doorstep. And if I may, a final point, because we started out on that, this question of Romania and Bulgaria, I think it was Ivan who mentioned it, you know, people realized it was the wrong thing. It was the wrong thing in one dimension, it was absolutely the right thing in a geopolitical dimension. And remember, France was the one who pushed Romania because of francophonie, because of, you know, the Latin language, and because, you know, the Francophile nature of Romanian elites. Just imagine the European Union and NATO today without Romania and Bulgaria in it, with a Russia as we, the cliche says, the assertive Russia, that we have a completely open eastern flank. So yeah, huge problems with countries that are not totally ready. Romania has done a lot, Bulgaria is sort of doing it. The same reason, the same kind of argument was put for Greece when it was taken in 91. People still use that. Why did we take Greece? Look at the mess that it produced. But just look at, again, the geopolitical, just look at the geographic map, and you will see that there is sense to this. But, yes, nobody's perfect, the European Union is not, but at least geopolitically, I think we have something. And then when you look at the map, this is the reason also to bring in the Western Balkans, but provided that we, citizens of this region, push our leaders to do what they need to do.
And I think from that respect, the activity of NATO, which sometimes seems to exceed the activity of the European Union in the region, is extremely important. I was in a conference a few months ago in North Macedonia, where it was after the French no on the accession talks, but after the decision on the NATO accession, and because of the NATO accession, there was quite a lot of enthusiasm, and I think it was really moving to see that they do not see the situation hopeless. So on this positive note, thank you very much for both of you, and also for Corina for being here. Unfortunately, I forgot to tell at the beginning, we would have had a fourth speaker on the panel as well. Had been Morvai from Erste Foundation, but she unfortunately felt ill, so she sends her warmest regards to the speakers and the audience as well, but she remained in Vienna. So thank you very much for both of you, and thank you all for staying here.